We have some very interesting lectures lined up for you over the spring, but none better than here tonight to start off with the Otway family of Templederry. And who better man to deliver on it, only Jamie Groome himself. Jamie is one of our most accomplished speakers. I would also like to acknowledge the presence here tonight of Miriam Lamb, who has written an extensive history on the Otway family. And of course, we're all aware Miriam's connection with the Stapleton to Cross the Palace, more and on. Now, it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to the master himself, Jamie Groome.
Thanks very much. And I'd just like to thank Miriam as well. I used your work extensively in this research. Sorry about earlier on, there was technological difficulties. I had to find another laptop. I'm going to use notes as well. I'm not great at public speaking, so you'll have to bear with me. So tonight, we're going to discuss the Otway family and Castle Otway from 1660 to 1922 and the making of a landed estate. They built not only to emphasise that they had arrived, but that they would remain. These are the words of Robert Fitzroy Foster, born in 1949 in Waterford. He's a famous Irish historian and academic, emeritus professor of Irish history at Oxford. And in his seminal work, Modern Ireland, 1600 to 1972, he described the Anglo-Irish ascendancy, class, and their construction of the big houses in Ireland thus: they built in order to convince themselves not only had they arrived, but that they would remain. They built lavish, permanent country houses and estates to assert their authority over the people, a power over the landscape, and legitimise their rights of permanence in a country where they were the minority ruling class. Tonight we will discuss one of the big houses close to Borrisoleigh, Castle Otway and its family, and in the future I would like to cover some more of the big houses in the area, their histories, their families, their influence locally, and how they have carried on, or not, as the case may be, over the past few hundred years. The significance of the big house on our landscapes has not gone unnoticed by the local population. It is my belief that the construction and architecture of these vast estates and strongholds highlighted the deep insecurities felt by the newcomers. They built to keep out and protect their material livelihoods, but they also succeeded in alienating the local population, both socially and culturally. They often resented and opposed their existence. These new settlers were not, as their predecessors had, the Anglo-Norman families, going to evolve, integrate and assimilate, and as the saying goes, become more Irish than the Irish themselves. Landed estates across Ireland used architecture, landholding and landscape design to signal authority and permanence. You can also see this today overtly in the erection of flags on poles, painted curbstones, street names, language use, the erection and dismantling of statues, the height and stature of government buildings and places of worship. If anyone has ever visited the Vatican, you cannot be unawed. All architecture and landscape design feeds into our culture and identity, and it is a subtle way of influencing the population. Castle Otway is a clear example of this use of architecture, landholding and landscape design to signal authority and permanence. They were a family arriving after the Cromwellian settlement who stamped their presence physically, socially and politically upon Templederry, North Tipperary and the surroundings. This photograph here is from the late 19th or early 20th century. You can still see some of the formal gardens, and later I hope to show you a part of the formal gardens and how extensive and elaborate these gardens and grounds were. Firstly, just some of my own history and connection with and my reasoning for this research. As you see, a lot of people here from Templederry will recognise the top right-hand side and the verse. Templederry, my home, bright home of my childhood, there's no place like thee. With thy mountains and wildwood, thy vale and thy lea, No matter wherever I'm doomed for to roam, I ne'er will forget thee, Templederry, my home. Written by Mr. Burke after emigrating to the United States, recited by his nephew Thomas Burke as Smith, who still worked in Templederry at the time, in 1938, aged about 50, and it was collected by Millicent Fitzsimons of Castle Otway National School, Templederry, in April 1938. The first time I heard that song, I was a young fella working in Clodagh, serving the men from Kelly's from neighbouring Templederry, and I learned through my time in Clodagh how intensely proud of their heritage they were. So on the old road to Limerick, as you pass through Templederry village, look right. Well, you have to stop the car actually and look right, and you'll see a large, dark and imposing structure. It sits off to the right, Castle Otway. Now a stone shell. It has long intrigued me. Lars Smith, a friend of the family and neighbour, owned the land and the remaining structure. He passed away suddenly 2 winters ago, and I decided to dig deeper into the story of Castle Otway and its previous inhabitants. Castle Otway today lies about a kilometre north of Templederry village, in the townland of Clahonan, 9 kilometres northwest of Borrisoleigh and 14 kilometres southwest of Nenagh, in the county of Tipperary. When I started this research, it was being farmed by Terry Ryan of Oatfield. He used the yard and the outhouses, but the castle lied derelict and open to the elements. The wind rushes through the open windows and through the fallen roof. It is covered in ivy and cattle graze on the lawns. But still today, nearly 400 years after the first Otway arrived, you stand beneath and gaze up at this imposing structure, you get a sense of its previous magnificent mightiness. In this presentation, it will be shown that the Otway family did build to emphasise their arrival, but also that they would remain for nearly 300 years. They built both castle and country house, school, church, rectory, police barracks, a mill and a hunting lodge. They built these powerhouses to possess and proclaim power and privilege and patrimony. Their status was built into the landscape so that their powers would increase and remain down through the generations. On the 13th of September in 1654, at a court of survey held in Nenagh for the barony of Upper Ormond, it was found that 1.5 ploughlands of 187 acres at Fallini and Clahonan and a ploughland of 100 acres in the parish of Templederry were held in part by a Daniel Kennedy of Ballinotta and a castle partly repaired with 4 cabins. This O'Kennedy Castle of Clahonan would become the property of John Otway, who was listed as a gentleman of County Tipperary on the poll money ordinance of 1661. On this ordinance he was described as one who shall pay £1 4 shillings sterling towards the speedy raising of money for His Majesty's service. Charles II, who had regained his father's kingdom after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 after Cromwell had beheaded his father. The civil survey of 1654 was held after the Cromwellian invasion to establish land ownership in the conquered Ireland, and then redistributed amongst Cromwell's investors and army. Lieutenant John Otway had arrived in Ireland, a lieutenant in Cromwell's army, a descendant of a Thomas Otway of Middleton in Westmoreland, England. In the census of Ireland in 1659, a John O'Hoey Esquire is listed as the owner of Latra, whilst 4 Irish are listed as occupants at Clahonan. He purchased 73 acres in Latra in August 1660 from another Cromwellian soldier as he sought to increase his holding. Overnight, the former lords of these lands had become the vassals. The Gaelic Kennedys, Hogans, Ryans and Gleesons would become cottiers on their own land. New tenants would arrive from neighbouring Laois and Offaly, and they would hold similar religious beliefs as the master of the castle. By the 1750s, the Otways had rebuilt and extended the original tower house. This later house featured castellations, machicolations, Doric stone entrance, landscape grounds, pleasure gardens, and a semicircular ha-ha. These features mirrored English country house traditions of projecting status, civility, lineage and permanence. We will look further at this landscape of place, or the built environment, later on in the presentation, but first we will look at the people. John Otway Esquire married Phoebe, daughter of Nicholas Loftus of Featherton in County Wexford. They would have 6 sons and 2 daughters. The daughters Elizabeth married Lloyd of Kilruane in Tipperary and Phoebe married Redding of Rahan in Tipperary. The estate at Clohonan would pass to John, the first son, and the second son Thomas would expand the holding into Nina and Lisson Hall. James, Adam, Caesar and Nicholas were the remaining sons. Strategic marriages bonded the Otways to the Loftus, Pretty, Waller, Cave, Toller and other ascendancy families. Sons served in the army, the navy, the clergy and the judiciary. Daughters married into neighbouring estates. These kinship networks would reinforce political, social and territorial stability across generations. Through the continuation of well-appointed marriages, sons and daughters to other landed families in Tipperary and further afield, the Carden, Pretty of Dolla, Cook, Loftus, Toller, Lloyd, Waller and Cave families all became connected and intertwined in the story of Castle Otway down the centuries. Surnames such as Loftus and Cook would carry through the years as Christian names for the Otway family members. This kin development was advantageous to the ascendancy class. The estate would pass to John, who died without issue at age 21 in 1722. I think he's over to far right there, is he? And he died without issue, and then it went to his heir and first cousin Henry Otway, who was a son to Thomas Otway and Christina Otway, born Locke. He would pass in 1736. By the middle of the 18th century, the Otway family would be well established amongst the ascendancy class of Tipperary in Ireland. Sons were educated at Trinity in Oxford, some took holy orders, others joined the army and the Royal Navy. Henry's son Cook married Elizabeth Waller, and after a life in the military would pass in 1801. Thomas married Martha Pretty of Dolla in 1757, and they would carry out many improvements on the estate. He would rebuild, plan to develop and extend the Castle Otway estate and its grounds. These constructions embedded the family's authority into the everyday landscape. Above is a map from 1774 available online at Tipperary Studies. It outlines townlands and fields described as excellent pasture, orchards, forts and ponds. I'm not sure if some of these names exist anymore. Some people from Tipperary might be able to tell me or not. The Bloody Hill Meadow, Campania Felix, Old Oak Wood, Oatfield, Fair Grove, Councillor's Garden, Deer Park. The next slide is about the Otway harp. A slight diversion. It's difficult to ascertain exactly when this instrument was made, but from its general form and decoration, a date somewhere around the late 16th or early 17th century, from the 1500s into the 1600s, when Gaelic Ireland and the bards were at their zenith. Early in the 18th century, it appears to have passed through the hands of the famed harp maker Cormac O'Kelly, who may well have refurbished the instrument at this time. The only harper known with any degree of certainty to have played this instrument was Patrick Quinn from Portadown. Now another member of the extended Otway family, the Nagalton-Nina line, is worth considering when it comes to the harp. Even though he was never owner of the castle himself, Reverend Caesar Otway was a known writer and antiquarian with a liking for Irish culture and history, just the sort of man who would have had an interest in acquiring an old Irish harp, especially one known to have belonged to a noted harper. He left Tipperary to study divinity at Trinity College Dublin, where he obtained his BA, and he spent most of his life in that city. It was in Dublin that he met George Petrie, and together they started the Dublin Penny Journal in 1832. The Otway family also served as justices of the peace and on grand juries, and were integral parts of the British and Irish ruling class. Lettice Otway, sister to Henry Otway, had married Daniel Toller, MP and High Sheriff of Tipperary, and it was he whose hand-picked jury had ensured the conviction and execution of the innocent Father Nicholas Sheehy in Clonmel in 1766. Lettice is on the top right, married Daniel Toller in Grange. Their son John Toller, Lord Norbury, was known as the hanging judge. He was a notorious member of the judiciary. In 1803 he sentenced Robert Emmet to be hanged, and in one single assizes in Clonmel he had the pleasure of sentencing no fewer than 198 men and women to death. Thomas Otway of Castle Otway in Listonhall oversaw the golden years of the estate, and is described thus from an inscription at Templederry. At the latter residence breathed his last on the 26th day of June 1786, in the 56th year of his age. Sincerely regretted by his equals, superiors he had none, and followed to the tomb by thousands of the labouring poor with tears and lamentations. This tablet is raised to his memory by his nephew, Loftus William Otway, in grateful remembrance of the unremitting kindness and tender affection continued to him until his death, and also on the benefits of his generous attachment which had survived his brief but well-spent life. More on Mr. Loftus William Otway in a minute. After Thomas, the estate passed to Cook, and then their son Henry, who had married Sarah Cave, daughter to Sir Thomas Cave of Northamptonshire. They would become absentee landlords. Henry passed away on September 13th, 1815 at age 47. He was buried in Stanford Hall. Loftus William Otway, brother to Henry Otway Cave and son of Cook, who had erected the tablet in Templederry graveyard in remembrance of his uncle Thomas, is remembered below. His epitaph is in Highgate Cemetery. It reads, "To the memory of General Sir Loftus William Otway, C.B., Colonel of the 84th Regiment and Knight Commander of the Order of King Charles III of Spain, born 1775, died June 1854. His distinguished service to his country throughout the Irish Rebellion and the Peninsular Wars are recorded in the history of this time. Brave and gentle, honourable, generous and true, possessed of rare and highly cultivated mental powers, he has not left earth a kinder heart, a more gallant spirit. Gone to rest, thy rest, brave soldier, esteemed by all, and truly loved and deeply lamented by those who knew thee best." However, locally, in local folklore, he is recalled here. During the summer of '98, the Yos had their headquarters at Castle Otway, Templederry, and led by Colonel Otway and Captain Shouldes, hither and thither they rode throughout this district, bullying the people. One fine August evening they rode into the valley of Roisin, and there surprised a group of half a dozen boys fishing in the Clodagh. Called on to surrender, they did so, and were ordered to cross the river and stand with their hands up the roadside. Otway commanded the boy who had carried the fish to recross the river and bring them to him. The lad told him he couldn't possibly do so, as he had let them fall into the water, and that by the time they were likely some 100 yards down the river. Annoyed by this answer, the colonel ordered one of his Yos to yank him immediately. The brute threw a rope which he carried on his saddle around the boy's neck and swung him into the air. This he repeated until he considered his victim dead. Dismounting, he unloosed the rope, and the troops were about to ride away. Just as they did so, the boy's widow's mother appeared on the scene and shrieked aloud, "God's curse and my curse on the Otways. May they wither root and branch." The Otways have gone, but this tale is still remembered around the firesides of Ilee. Quite a different epitaph for Colonel Otway. And this tale was told by Pat Burke, aged 70, of Killamine, to Thomas Gleeson of Knockanure, Borrisalee, in November 1938. And we indeed owe a grand debt of gratitude to Thomas Gleeson and all the other children who diligently collected many of those wonderful stories from their elders in that winter of 1938. After Henry Otway, his son Robert Otway Cave succeeded to the family seat at Castle Otway in 1815. He was also heir apparent to his mother, the 3rd Baroness Bray of Stanford-on-Avon, Northamptonshire. He represented Leicester in the House of Commons, and in 1832 he was elected for Tipperary, and again in 1835 until his death in 1844. He was a fervent supporter of Valentine and then Nicholas Maher, Turtila and Thurles, MPs, Catholic gentry elected to Parliament alongside him for Tipperary, in opposition to the Tory Orange candidates. His wife, Sophia Burdett, would come to have a large influence in Templederry, Borrisoleigh and its environs. Mrs. Otway Cave, as she became known, became friendly with the rebel Young Irelander Catholic priest Father John Kenyon and contributed to the famine relief locally. She donated £30 each to the poor relief funds in Templederry and Borrisoleigh, double the closest amount. On his wife's death, Mrs. Sophia Otway Cave, in 1849, Castle Otway passed to his cousin, Vice Admiral Robert Jocelyn Otway, the son of Reverend Samuel Jocelyn Otway, 4th son of Cook Otway. He had entered the Royal Navy at 13 in 1821 and retired as captain in 1864. He served as the High Sheriff of Tipperary in 1868, and in 1867 he cut the rents to his tenants after a bad harvest. He passed away at Molesworth Street, Dublin in 1884. His effects of £12,950 was proved to be by 2 executors, his widow Anne Digby and the Jocelyn Otway Johnson of Portarlington. Their daughter Frances Margaret Otway, the last woman to live in Castle Otway, married a William Clifford Birmingham Otway Ruthven on October 1865 in Neenah. They had 8 children. Robert M.B. Otway, born in 1867 and later served as the captain in the Royal Artillery, Thomas Ormond Birmingham, born in 1872, and the 3rd son, Mervyn Henry, born in 1877, and they had 5 daughters. Annette Roosevelt, Marguerite Frances, who died young, Roosevelt Frances Elizabeth, Edith Mary, and Cecilia Harriet Beatrice. In 1901 and 1911, Frances was living at the castle. She was accompanied by 1 daughter, Edith Mary, and a granddaughter, Margaret Rose, and 4 servants. In 1911, once again accompanied by her daughter Edith and her husband, Alexander Wilson, and a second daughter, Cicely, and husband, Major William Finch, and a granddaughter, Margaret Rose Finch, a governess and 3 servants. Robert, the only son, entered the Royal Navy in 1914 and served through the First World War, and in 1926 married Vera Beryl Martin, daughter of Martin Alfred Cook. Their daughter Una Beryl Martin was born in 1929 and their son Robert in July 1930. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order after Operation Neptune in Normandy in 1944. He died in May 17, 1974 in Surrey, England. His sister, Professor Annette Jocelyn Otway, was Ireland's most distinguished medieval historian and held the Lecky Chair at Trinity College, Dublin. Her ashes were interred in the family vault in Templederry, and she was unmarried. Their father, Robert Otway Ruthven, Royal Garrison Artillery, died in 1919 in the Glasnevin when she was 10 years old. Her uncle, Captain Mervyn Otway Ruthven, Merchant Navy, also unmarried, is also remembered at Templederry, although he is buried in Bantry. Her nephew, son of Robert and Vera, Major Robert M.B. Otway Ruthven, died on November 2018 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And in 1987, his son, Robert Jocelyn Oliver Otway Ruthven, announced his forthcoming marriage to Mary Ann Debenham of Sussex, England, in the Times of London. Today, the Otway family are spread around the world. A little bit more about Annette Jocelyn Otway Ruthven. She was named one of the first women ever fellows at Trinity College, and she was born in Dublin in 1909, the second of 4 children. Her youth was marred by family tragedy. 2 of her sisters died young, and her father died in 1919 when she was 10. In 1916, one of her mother's relations, Roger Casement, was hanged for treason in the aftermath of the failed Easter Rebellion in Dublin. And Annette Jocelyn never tried to hide the family connection with Casement and would occasionally mention it in conversation, to the pained surprise of some of her more conservative colleagues in Trinity. She belonged to the second generation of women who entered Trinity, following the example of such predecessors as Constantia Maxwell, whom she succeeded as the Lecky Professor of History in 1951. Her career was marked by achievements such as being appointed a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. Beginning as a lecturer in Trinity, she was appointed Lecky Professor of History in 1951, named a Fellow of Trinity College in 1968 and Dean of Faculty from 1969 to 1973. She was a member of the Irish Manuscripts Commission and was a member of international commissions for history of representative and parliamentary institutions. Her publications include a history of medieval Ireland, and both herself and Owen MacNeill, the founder of the Gaelic League, the Irish Volunteers, and in 1916 the Countermanding Order issuance, were pioneering, highly influential historians of medieval Ireland. They were both linked to Trinity College Dublin, the Manuscript Commission, and the study of early Irish institutions. Annette built further upon the foundational, often nationalist-leaning medieval research that was established by MacNeill. And both historians are critical to understanding the evolution of Irish medieval studies, moving from MacNeill's foundational studies to Otway Ruthven's structural analysis. The second part now, the built heritage. On the right, you can see all the townslands that they possessed. So on the top right, Donegal, and then on the bottom right you have Rushing Bay, Rushing Moor, Knockadony, Curracarroll, Glentan, Fantan, South, Kildare, Gurteen, Garan, Fellini, Clahonan, Luchan, Upper and Lower, Tooree, Gary Glass, Cortina Valla. The 3,776 acres granted in 1665 had increased and grown to 8,000 acres by the mid-18th century. It would be at its largest until the encumbered estates court of 1850s. The heavy financial toll on the landed families because of the consequences of the Great Famine, the loss of estate income, along with the maintenance of the extravagant lifestyle, resulted in the breakup of the estates. In the Griffiths' valuation in Nina of October 8, 1840, Mrs. Otway Cave held many lands in 5 parishes of Annameadle, Kilmore, Killanave, Latra and Templederry. Captain Robert Otway held townlands in Glenkeen, James Otway had lands at Nina and Killerwan, and Caesar Otway at Yahalara parish. Their estate developments included Castle Otway, Lisson Hall, Prior Park, Rapla, the mills at Latra, the Deer Park and plantations, school, rectory, lodges, barracks, and all these constructions embedded the family's authority into the everyday landscape. The buildings acted as symbols of control, projecting wealth while facilitating estate management. The school, rectory, churches, mills and constabulary barracks materially shaped local social structure, tying the tenantry to Otway governance. If you can see here, this semicircular here is called a ha-ha, and it's a deep ditch. It's a deep ditch in front of the house, and as you look out across the vista of the grass, the cattle, cows, deer can come up to it but can't come no further. So it's like a clear view, no fences. And this ha-ha is a metaphor for the family, the buildings. This ha-ha is like an invisible fence, and it separated the elite from the tenants. And the ha-ha to me is like a metaphor for the separation in social hierarchy. You can see the extent of the gardens and the plantations, ponds. The pond built up at the top of this is in 1840. The person assumed to have designed the building was a William Leeson of Bolingbroke and Neenah. He was a neighbour, and he's presumed he designed Castle Otway and Lisson Hall for the Otway family. He was described as the architect of Rapla House and Prior Park for James Otway in 1776, and he was the first town planner of Westport in County Mayo. He also designed Kilboy House Dolla and Traverstown House Silvermines. As I said, an interesting feature of the grounds is the semicircular hall, the purpose of which was to combine the function of a fence without interrupting the vista. It protects the formal lawns and gardens, whilst keeping the pastoral view unblemished by fence or wall. The Garand Mill and Race appear. You can see it if anyone's driving the new road to Neenah, it's still there on the left. I hope it won't be knocked. And you can see that on the map. And we can also see the pleasure gardens, or formal gardens, the woods, the pond, the deer park that surround Castle Otway. In 1845, a James and William Coughlin operated the Corntuck and Carding mills. And at Clohonan and Templederry respectively, a Roman Catholic chapel and parochial house and Church of Ireland church and graveyard and glebe house were also listed. Mrs. Otway Cave was the immediate lessor. In other words, she owned the Roman Catholic chapel house, Church of Ireland chapel house, graveyard. She owned the whole place really. The Otway family had built and developed extensively in the area, creating the permanent village of Templederry. The Roman Catholic chapel and houses, the Church of Ireland church, corresponding rectory, and a single-roomed classroom with a residence for the teacher. A lodge house, a hunting lodge at Gortahumma, the mills at Latra, the deer park, a plantation of Scotch pine and beech, the landscape vistas, the ponds, the various orchards, 2 constabulary barracks, an orangery, and of course the country houses and estates at Lisson Hall, Clohonan and Prior Park. This happened to increase and maintain their status, wealth and influence. Their wealth was mostly derived from rents to a mostly Roman Catholic tenantry, although here there were above average Protestant tenants brought in to improve the land and develop ancillary industries such as wool and linen. The Otways represented in Parliament, the judiciary, the army, the navy. They protected their vast estates by controlling the local government, judiciary and militias, whilst often overseeing from abroad. They had at first built a stronghold with stone and mortar, a permanent structure for security and protection. Now with the country houses, residences and estates, the family proved their social position, ascendancy and permanence in Tipperary and in Irish society at large. After the arrival and establishment of the Otway estate, leases were mainly granted to Protestant settlers. These settlers often were brought in to develop and improve the Otway holdings. Flax was grown and mills constructed. Vast plantations of beech, larch and Scots pine were developed by experienced woodsmen. Estate staff and managers with varying skills and attributes, expert shepherds, bovine breeders were employed by the Otways. The Catholic tenants in the main existed as cottiers, although some farmers held leases for 30 years. In keeping with the law, no lease for lives were granted to Catholic farmers. Between 1752 and 1787, there were 7 Catholic tenants and 13 Protestant tenants. In the mid-18th century, attempts were made by several landlords to attract Protestant families to Upper Ormond. In the Title Plotman books of 1826 to 1832, John and Leonard Sholes held lands at Cooley, Glentan, Glenkeen and Garand Otway and Amid, respectively. Miriam Lamb in her book A Tipperary Landed Estate, Castle Otway, records 29 and 22 Protestants attending school at Templederry and Kilboy respectively, while none attended at the adjoining parishes of Burrasilly and Overchurch. The combined Protestant population of Templederry and Latra accounted for over 19% of that whole population by 1835. Protestant settlers were intentionally brought into the estate to improve farming and develop industry, flax mills, woodland. Townslands in Templederry such as Tooree, which in Irish means bleaching green, reflects its use in the flax industry. Estate records did show active management, rent adjustments and engagement in local famine relief. The Otways also served as magistrates, MPs, military officers, and they dominated the civic institutions. That's a map showing their lands in 1853, just before the encumbered estates. Quite a mark. The last days in Tipperary. From the time of the marriage of Henry, the son of Cook and Baroness Bray, to Sarah Cave, it is understood the estate was experiencing financial troubles. In a letter to his law agent in November 1789, he is querying the delay in Harry's marriage settlement being fixed, as he was afraid the match would be lost if the matter was not sorted. The match was worth £3,000 English at a time, when the estate was in the debt of 2,000 Irish. In 1815, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the fall in grain prices, many small farmers were ruined. The estates began to move towards pastoralism and stock rearing, as tillage and small plots were unproductive. This land and resource problem, along with the huge increase in population, was causing much unrest and civil disobedience in the area. Migration from other overcrowded Protestant areas such as Cloughjordan, Borrisokane and Moneygall to the Templederry area and the Otway estate also occurred at this time. Huge migration of local Protestant families to Canada also occurred at this time. Bruce Elliott has written extensively of the migration of over 775 North Tipperary families to Canada at this time. The Catholic population at this time had resented paying tithes, assessed on the tilled land only, and they had resented paying tithes for many years, and the Tithe War of 1830 to 1838 led to further tensions and agitation between the communities. White boy violence and atrocity in the region further increased the tension. On October 23, 1838, Charles O'Keefe Esquire, the land agent to Valentine Maher, was murdered in Thurles, and his son-in-law, John Lanigan, was land agent to Otway Cave MP. The estate was further diminished after the Encumbered Estates Court of 1853. The extended family had built the finest houses and estates throughout North Tipperary, at Castle Otway, Riversfield, Lisson Hall, Rapla, Prior Park and Ballinweir. At the valuation of 1840, Mrs. Otway Cave was the immediate lesser of the first three, and the latter three by families and relatives such as Toller, Waller and Freeman. After the famine and the halving of the population, with the departure of over 3 million people, either to the New Worlds or the next world, by the early 1850s, the estate was in big trouble, and it was further diminished after the Encumbered Estates Court of 1853. Financial strain and the court forced major land sales. The political upheavals of 1919 and the Decade of Revolution further destabilised landed families. And Castle Otway, its rectory, school and barracks were burned in August 1922. In April 2022, Matty Crowe of Gortahoma brought me to the ruins of the castle and the hunting lodge in Garryglass. The lodge is long gone, the stone reused. The remnants of the stables are what remains. His mother, Mary Ryan, told him that she remembered that the fire burned for a fortnight, and the Crowe family had been recorded as tenants on the Otway land since before 1823. During this decade of unrest, many landed families had fled and abandoned their houses and estates. Twice the number of houses were burned during the Civil War than the War of Independence. And after the Civil War, for some, the Irish state compensation was welcome, but for others, the banishment was a nightmare and the worst betrayal. The loss of control of the state apparatus had been disastrous for much of the ascendancy, and their livelihoods had been decimated. Agrarian tension had simmered over once more, and many of the big houses had been looted and burned, not by strange enemies, but by the covetousness of neighbours. They had indeed built, but of cold stone, mortar and iron, in high castles and big houses. By 1921, Frances Margaret Otway Ruthven was the last resident. The estate's symbolic power could not withstand the agrarian agitation, the loss of state backing, and the revolutionary violence. Today the castle stands as a ruin, overtaken by nature, yet still commanding the landscape. The Ha is a lot more visible there, actually. They had remained isolated and separated from their tenantry. Like the Ha had separated the grazing cattle from the formal gardens, the Otway family had also been separated from the populace with an invisible wall. The Ha visually separated the elite from tenants, a metaphor for social hierarchy. Today, Castle Otway and many other former seats of power stand, ruined, empty, windblown and ivy-strewn. Memories to the times past of a family who had once risen to great power and influence, but who had ultimately succumbed to the ancient patrimonial values of land and possession. The Otways had built a material world designed to last. Stone houses, managed landscapes, institutional buildings. Their intention to proclaim an enduring socio-political order, yet permanence relied on political, economic and community legitimacy, not just stone walls. When these supports collapsed, the built environment could not preserve their power. Did they build to remain? Yes, they did. Their buildings still dominate the historical and physical landscape memory of Templederry, but the permanence was illusory. Architecture could not prevent the decline of the ascendancy families during Ireland's revolutionary century. What remains today is both a monument to ambition and a reminder that power, no matter how solidly built, can crumble. The decline of the Anglo-Irish elite happened gradually over the 18th to 20th centuries. It wasn't one event, but a layered process, driven by political change, land reform, nationalism, and shifts in power structures. Why the Anglo-Irish class fell? The downfall came from a combination of a loss of political power, the end of the Protestant ascendancy. And this started with the Act of Union in 1801 and Catholic emancipation in 1827. The Land Acts, the Land Wars, allowed tenants to buy land, and this destroyed their economic base. The revolutionary violence destroyed their physical estates and pushed many to leave. And the new Irish Free State prioritised a Catholic nationalist identity. Irish nationalism and the Gaelic revival made them culturally and politically isolated. Their cultural position was often that they felt too Irish to be fully English, but too English to be accepted as Irish. Writers like Yeats and Elizabeth Bowen wrote about this uneasy in-between identity, a hybrid elite who existed between two major cultures. Yeats' most famous idea, a tragic but noble identity, and he portrayed the Anglo-Irish as proud, imaginative, passionate, but haunted by a sense of an ending. In Yeats' imagination, they were a class defined by beauty and decline, destined to be remembered in symbol and myth rather than in political power. He saw them as one thread in the broader tapestry of the Irish identity, even if they were never fully embraced by the rising nationalist movement. Elizabeth Bowen described Anglo-Irish identity, a class defined by displacement within their own home. Bowen saw the Anglo-Irish as people who belonged to Ireland physically, its houses, landscapes and weather, yet were emotionally and historically unrooted. She portrays them as living in Ireland for generations, but still feeling like guests, attached to their houses, more than their nation, unsure of how they fitted into the modern Irish identity. They were native but never fully accepted. Where Yeats mythologised the Anglo-Irish, Bowen humanised them, revealing their anxieties, their loneliness and their quiet tragedies. Did this crisis of identity contribute to their downfall? That question is for another day. And this night I will leave the last words to a Kennedy. A Michael Kennedy of Shanbally Yard, written by his daughter Josie in 1938. The local landlords. Otway was the landlord of this district. They were here since the time of Cromwell. The Otways were always looked upon as good landlords. They gathered no tithes from the people. There was a body of yeomen minding the castle about 100 years ago. Otway's ancestors were captains in Cromwell's army in 1649. There were no people evicted in this district. Thank you.
Jamie Mila Montfort, magnificent lecture there, beautifully illustrated and very, very informative. I suppose we need to be surprised when we hear and read of some of the scandal bombs that are going off amongst the British monarchy at the current time. Now,
He would have fisted in well.
absolutely. Now, we will have a little chat, and I'm sure there are a few people here who have valuable nuggets of information and contributions. So maybe while Margaret and Michael are making the cup of tea, we might have a little chat among ourselves. Thank you all very much.